Hey everybody, welcome back to another review, and this time we're talking about more Iron Man. This time it's Iron Man numbers 65 through 72 of Iron Man Volume 3. This is written by Robin Laws. Now, Mike Grell, who was the previous writer, co-wrote issues 65 and 66 with Robin Laws, but most of this is basically his run. Issues 65 through 69 are a 5-part story arc called Manhunt, and then issues 70 to 72 are a 3-part story arc called Vegas Bleeds Neon. So Grell's there for 2 issues, but it's really all Robin Laws' direction. Now, if you want to talk about inconsequential nothing runs, then boy, this is one. This is definitely one of the most inconsequential things in probably comics run history. And that's not to say it's bad, it's just absolutely nothing. There's a lot here that could be interesting, and there's a lot here that feels like it would be better served in a different medium. Manhunt is basically Iron Man meets Fugitive, and Vegas Bleeds Neon is basically I wish I was reading Iron Man Noir. And that's not the statement on the quality of either book, it's just that's sort of where we are now. Manhunt is more post 9/11 storytelling Iron Man. The whole idea here is there's a weapon that's fired at a Chinese embassy, and Iron Man gets the rap for it. Well, Tony Stark does, but now the whole world knows that they're the same person. And Tony Stark gets to blame for it because it's a Stark design, and it gets linked back to Tony Stark making a deal with North Korea on behalf of the Clinton administration, and that kind of being used as a foreign policy tactic. It was all completely legit. It was all for a very common good as far as America was concerned, but it's used as ammo against Tony Stark to make it look like he's this un-American terrorist. And it's basically just questioning this at the time idea of American loyalty, and it's sort of in places talking about this air of unease created in post 9/11 America, that suddenly Islamophobia became a really big thing, and well, more so than it already was, but it suddenly became this thing where, like, people were paranoid about their neighbors, and, like, the idea of a terrorist attack being, like, a spy operation kind of thing became even more frightening than it was during the Cold War. And so, despite everything Tony has done as both Tony Stark and as Iron Man, he gets thrown under the bus by most of the public because of this vague possibility that he might be in line with bad guys, but not even that, but just this vague possibility that his name is attached to something related to bad guys. And it's very much playing on that sort of simplistic view of politics and the simplistic view of war and the simplistic view of foreign policy. And Tony Stark's company takes a big hit because of this. Tony has to work with S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to figure out what's going on, but as the frame job keeps getting bigger and bigger, Tony has to go into hiding, and there's a moment here where both him and Happy Hogan get shot, but Tony never fully recovers, and so he's masquerading around in armor and a trench coat, and dyed his hair blonde, and shaved his beard, and trying to like unravel this mystery. The behind the scenes of all this is more Pepper and Happy Hogan Tony Stark love triangle stuff, because Happy becomes a drunk after what happened with Pepper, because now that she's lost the baby and she hasn't told him, she's being really private, really reserved, and ultimately Happy thinks that this is because of something both either he did or in related to Tony Stark, and so he's unable to get through to her despite his patience, and so he just kind of resorts to drinking. And Tony, sort of furious at this whole situation, blurts out to him that Pepper had a child, lost it. It was his fault because of what happened with the woman in the battle armor, and now they have to talk about this in order to get over it. And Happy flips, but before they can have a conversation about it, both him and Tony are shot. And Pepper comes in to try and help both sides, but Tony explains to her that he told Happy what happened, and then she suddenly is having nothing to do with Tony. And then there's a point where a police officer is like, we can save your husband, just turn over Tony Stark to us. And so she betrays Tony and gives the police officer this failsafe that Tony entrusted her with in case anything ever happens to his armor. So it's like a shutoff code. And so she just betrays Tony, and it just becomes this really annoying interpersonal drama that's not founded on much of anything of interest. There's a little bit of like Pepper Potts versus Rumiko Fujikawa stuff here, because Pepper hates her because she's like the audience, and Rumiko's only concerned really throughout this whole ordeal with the fact that Tony isn't able to spend time with her. Like, now everything's eating away with them being together, and she's seeing this in the most selfish point of view possible. So all that's unfolding, and then we find out that one of the aides to the Mandarin's son is behind all of this, and so Tony goes to stop them, and they do, and the Kid Mandarin gives up all the people involved in this conspiracy and says that, I will leave you alone now, Tony, but I promise I'm going to rebuild the world one day like my father would have wanted. And so there's kind of like a divide between the two at that point, but a bit of mutual respect. And the way they deal with this embassy blowing up and the way the final panel is shot and everything, it is very clearly homaging, or very clearly meant to evoke post 9/11 imagery of like standing at ground zero. And it's trying very hard to be politically relevant in places, but more often than not, it feels like it's just trying to catch the zeitgeist, catch lightning in a bottle. It's trying very hard to be like this fun, insane, wild thrill ride with places of interesting politics, and I feel like they never really work together. And it's not as bad as what John Miller would eventually do, but it is kind of just mouthpiecing certain ideas as opposed to doing anything with characters, and ultimately none of it means much. And I feel like this book is, in particular, is very dated. Like, you go back and read this now, and I don't think you'd have the same effect. I don't think it has the same effect as it would have when you read it in 2002 or 2003. Like, it's not tapping into the same mentality. I feel like there's a lot of facts and revelations and changes to how we perceived post 9/11 effects around the world that this book isn't aware of yet. And so retroactively going back and trying to insert yourself into that paranoid mindset doesn't work as well. The second story is Vegas Bleeds Neon, which is this kind of classic Tony, having just dealt with all this, needs some time to himself, and decides he's just going to go on a trip to Vegas and help this private detective out with a mystery she's working on because she needed Stark's help with a blueprint or something. And so they do that, and it's kind of a fun romp, and it turns into this big convoluted alien plot. The big anchoring point is that Tony's a Howard Hughes fan, and he's brought there because of his Howard Hughes knowledge, and that's kind of fun because Tony Stark is himself based on Howard Hughes. And Howard Hughes, if you know much about his history, later in life he kind of went mad, and this book explains, well, he bought this property that was referenced as an alien crash site, and this alien parasite is the thing that drove him mad. And that's kind of interesting. It's this idea of that, like, the people you look up to, is there a point where you can only look at aspects of a person's life and be fulfilled, as opposed to looking at their whole, and is it okay for your idols to be imperfect and to appreciate them for their imperfections? And I kind of like that. It's kind of fun. It's very noir. It's kind of stylized, and some of the covers are really unique, and it's an enjoyable read, but nothing great. The big development here is there's a point here where Tony switches out his Tin Man armor for the ablative armor. And the ablative armor is this armor that is this series of tiles. It produces its own tiles, and it's a series of tiles. So every time a piece of the armor is damaged, that tile is ejected and replaced with new tiles. And it's used to help him fight off this alien virus thing, and that technology would later be inserted into his Iron Secretary armor, which we'll talk about next. But that's the major things to explain here. There isn't a lot here that's interesting. It's kind of just a fill-in run. There isn't anything about this that feels like it adds to the Iron Man legacy, aside from that armor development that feeds into what happens later. It is completely skippable. If you want to go straight from Grell to John Miller, be my guest. If you want to go straight from Busiek to John Miller, be my guest. There really isn't much in between that matters at this point. Because again, this run was advertised as this bold, brand new direction for Iron Man, and is a completely different thing than what Mike Grell was doing. And at the end of issue 72, there's an ad that says, coming next month, a big, brand new, bold direction for Iron Man. And so it's kind of tiresome. It's kind of, well, we get it. You don't know what to do with this character. Can we just kind of live with the status quo for a while instead of constantly trying to reinvent the wheel? And that's, again, the biggest problem here. So this isn't great. It's not in trade as far as I know, and if you find the issues, I wouldn't recommend picking them up. There's just nothing about this run that informs in any way anything that comes before it or understands anything that came after it. So it's just kind of a filler run. If you don't like filler arcs in anime, don't read this. That's exactly what this is. It's a filler. So let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with anything I said. I'll be back with more Iron Man reviews to talk about John Miller's run. But until then, I will see you next time.